Soto was here. Does anybody, you remember?
I remember.
Do you know where it is?
It's in front of Trent, Ken Trent's office. There
Okay.
at the Citizens Bank.
I'd like to get a picture of it. So that has been part of the history of this area as Hernando de Soto coming through. When I was about 5 years old at my grandparents' house, my aunt came in from the field with an arrowhead and showed it to me, and it's like a light bulb come on. So that's all I thought about was Indians, and if we were playing cowboys and Indians, I was always an Indian, and I was always looking in my driveway for an arrowhead. I did find a few at my grandparents' house. When I was in school at Mississippi State, my roommate showed me where he had found arrowheads. So I started looking for arrowheads every weekend. That was an obsession. Then on Christmas in '64, I believe, I was out cutting a Christmas tree and I come across a little hill and there's a red bead laying on the ground. And I picked it up but didn't know what it was. I showed it to my roommate and he said, that's an Indian trade bead, a bead that the Europeans were trading to the Indians. So I went back to the spot and got out on the ground and crawled around and come up with a double handful of beads. Blue ones, white ones, red ones. So that became an obsession. And then I joined the Army Reserve. I met up Mr. Buddy Palmer here, and he told me about all the wonderful stuff he was finding in the Lee Acres area. He lived there, and they were developing that, and bulldozers were out there every day. So I started going up there, getting in on his territory, and finding some really good stuff there too. So we're all studying about the Indians and talking about them, and we're looking up whatever books we can find on them, and we've contacted Mississippi State and Ole Miss about getting an archaeologist to help us. No help. They were not interested because it wasn't old enough. This is only like 300 years old. They wanted stuff 3,000 years old. So we continued on doing what we were doing. We had maps that showed all of the early villages, but we didn't really know where they were. And in 1979, I did something that kind of changed everything. I took one wall of my house and I covered it with these topographical maps like this. So I'm looking at all of Lee County, Pontotoc, and Oklahoma County. Then I got the original survey maps from 1836. And I plotted all of that information off onto the modern day maps. So now I'm looking at the roads as they were when the Indians were here, and I'm looking at the creeks. I'm looking at the creeks, where they were and how they ran when the Indians were here. And this is wonderful. Then I invited the collectors to come, and we took colored pitch pens, and everywhere we had found something, we put a pen in that map. So we ended up with clusters of colored pens. Well, these clusters of pens were Indian villages. So now we knew exactly where the Indian villages were, but we didn't know the names of them. So we get the early maps and we go in and we start trying to put the names on them. And one map will have a village over here, and then the next map will have this same village moved over here. So we realized there was something going on. And because of political pressures from other Indian tribes and the Europeans, the Indians were moving their villages to get them into a closer group. So they were moving them from South Lee County and Pontotoc County up to the Lee Acres area. Well, this is wonderful, because now we can plot the movement of those villages and we know what year they moved. And because of that, we were able to go back and take all of the artifacts that we had found and put dates on them, something nobody else had ever been able to do. So we were able to date a bead or an artifact that we found within 30 or 40 years when it was actually used. Well, so what I also noticed is the roads in North Mississippi all funneled down to one spot, and that was Cotton Gin Port on the Tombigbee River. And there was a main road that went from the Tombigbee River to the Mississippi River. It had been in use by the Indians for thousands of years. The Benton people that Buddy's got the good collection on, they were using that same road to connect the Mississippi River with the Tombigbee River. Well, if Hernando de Soto came here, it was pretty obvious to me that he was following the same roads that the Indians were using. Why would you do it any other way? And this is a picture of Mr. Hernando, and they landed at Tampa Bay in Florida. This is pretty close to what that would have looked like. This is them meeting with Indian tribes in Florida. That probably is pretty close to what it actually would have looked like. This one is him discovering the Mississippi River, and it's completely fiction.
Yeah.
One thing, the Indians never used tents like this. They had little houses that they had built. De Soto and all of his men had lost all of their clothing. They were dressed in hides and skins, just like the Indians. All of the fancy stuff you see on these horses, that's not true. The piece of artillery you see, Spanish brought one piece of artillery with them, and they carried it around on a mule, and it was so heavy that they left it at an Indian village over in Georgia. So you're not going to see any artillery, you're not ever going to find any artillery left behind by the Spanish. All of this armor you see and these spikes, all of that had been melted down to make nails and spikes for them to build barges so they could get across the rivers. So, that's a Chickasaw Indian. That's the site of the place where the De Soto camp was. And look how far you can see out there. When I first stepped up to that place, I said, how come I have never seen this before? I never noticed it, because you can see 5 miles out across there. Some of y'all may know that old man sitting there in the hole. He's been there several times. Here he is, and we were digging in a Indian garbage pit and found a lot of wonderful stuff. You found one round thing that looked like a bead that had a precise groove cut all around it. You remember that?
I do.
Okay. Back up. He gets off his boats down here in Tampa, Florida. They know where that village was. They've discovered that. He wanders around through Florida. He comes to Tallahassee. They accidentally found his winter camp there. Now, once he starts up here through Georgia, nobody knows where he is. They do know that he went up through Georgia. Two things happened over in eastern Georgia. One, he left the artillery piece at an Indian village. The second thing is they dug up a lot of Indians there and got hundreds of pounds of freshwater pearls. The Indians wasn't happy about that, but there wasn't much they could do about it because De Soto had superior weapons and he knew how to use them, and they killed Indians because he could and because he wanted to. So he wanders around through Georgia, gets up into South Carolina, North Carolina. When De Soto started this expedition, they had already mapped out the Gulf of America down here. So they knew where the Mississippi River was, and they knew where Pensacola was, they knew where all of these rivers flow into the Gulf. So whatever they're doing up there, they know they're not going to be lost, because all they got to do is find a river and follow that river, and you'll end up down on the coast. So he comes out of North Carolina into Tennessee, and he hits the headwaters of the Tennessee River, comes down to about Chattanooga, jumps back down into northwestern Georgia at a town called Coosa. And just about everybody, these are all books that I've read. The original narratives would fit in a book about that size, but you got all these words here. Anyway, he stops at Coosa. He stays there because that's the capital of that group of Indians. Now, the other big site up there is the Etowah Mounds. It was probably third in size in the United States, with Cahokia being number 1, and Moundville being number 2, and Etowah being number 3. But it's deserted, and the archaeologists can't understand why. Well, it's very easy. There had been 2 expeditions by the Spanish, Ponce de Leon, or anyway, they had brought disease with them, and they had left beads and other trinkets behind. All of those made it to the elite people living in these large mound groups, and they all died off. So the Indians didn't know why. It was just they abandoned those large mound sites and moved into new villages, and that's what Coosa was. Most of the archaeologists have De Soto visiting Etowah Mounds. I'm not sure that I believe that. I think the Indians would have tried to keep him away from those important centers because they've seen what he did over in Georgia, and they don't want him digging up their ancestry. So they're gonna, in my mind, try to keep him away from the large mound centers. Well, he leaves Coosa, and he comes down here to Montgomery, Alabama is right here. Rome, Georgia is up here. Gadsden, Alabama up here. But when he gets to Montgomery, he's looking for supply ships down here on the Gulf. He don't know if they're there or not. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. So when he gets to Montgomery, he sends scouts down to Mobile Bay and Pensacola Bay to find out if the ships are there. He needs to know that. In the meantime, he moves over to a site east of Selma, Alabama. And John Swanton and Jeffrey Brain all put that as the site of Tallahassee, and I believe they are correct because it's almost completely surrounded by the river, and it was a large fortified city. But he stops in Tallahassee for 17 days. And I'm trying to say, why is he stopping? Well, of course, he's waiting on his scouts to get back and tell him where the ships are. In the meantime, while he's at Selma, Chief Tuscaloosa, whose name means black warrior, sends his son down to visit with De Soto and invite him up to his village. So De Soto's got a choice to make. I'm sitting right here, I can go to the left down to my supply ships, but I really don't have much to show for all this time I've been wandering around out here. Or I can go to Tuscaloosa's village and see what he's got. He promised to give him 100 women. And you got a bunch of 20 and 30-year-old Spanish men, they were probably interested in the women. We don't know. So, he makes the decision to go visit Chief Tuscaloosa. Chief Tuscaloosa was a very large man. He probably was 12 inches taller than any of the other Indians. He was so large that the Spanish didn't have a horse that he could ride because his feet would be on the ground. So he's a bad boy. And he is chief of the group that used to be living at Moundville. Moundville is also abandoned at this time, and the archaeologists don't know why. Well, it's very simple. The disease got to them, and they were dying. They have found one Nueva Cadiz bead at Moundville, so we know some of those trade goods were getting there. If the trade goods were getting there, the disease was getting there. So Tuscaloosa is not living at Moundville, which is right up here on the Black Warrior River. He's living in a new village, as the Spanish described it. They haven't been in that village very long. Now, every one of these people right here that have written all these words, and there's a lot of words there, every one of them has put Mobilia down here close to Mobile, Alabama. Well, why are you doing that? Because Mobilia sounds a lot like Mobile. And it just makes sense that Mobile must have been named for that town, so it's got to be down here by Mobile, Alabama. Wrong. Wrong. They've been looking for 200 years and they hadn't found it. Now, something's wrong. Either you're not going to find it because it's under a Walmart parking lot, or you're looking in the wrong place. They're looking in the wrong place. When De Soto left Coosa up here, he took the chief of that group with him, along with the chief's sister. Well, with the Indians, they inherited through the female line. So by taking the sister could really damage their religion and their chieftain. So he brings the chief all the way down here to Selma, Alabama, and lets him go. Well, those Indians up at Coosa, I don't believe they let their chief just be carried off and didn't try to do something about it. I believe they had a group of several hundred warriors that are following De Soto. And if one of them Spaniards happens to get lost, they're gonna kill him. But they're gonna follow him down. And when De Soto lets him go and he starts home, they're gonna find him pretty quick. And he is not happy at all. They've taken him a long way from home, and they've still got his sister. So he meets up with Tuscaloosa, and they both hate the Spanish because they're eating all their food, leaving their children to starve. They're taking their men as slaves to carry their baggage and working them until they die. And they're taking their women. Your daughter, your sister, they go home with the Spanish. So they hate them. They want the Spanish dead. Up until the time he gets to Selma, the Spanish haven't really had much of a battle. A few skirmishes, but they hadn't lost many men. They haven't even been tested very much because their weapons were so superior to what the Indians had. So the chief from Coosa and Tuscaloosa, they get together. What we're going to do, we're going to get De Soto coming up here, and we'll promise him all these women. And when we get him here, we're going to carry him off to a village named Mobile. And it's not down here by Mobile. I'll see if I got it. Okay. This boundary right here is the the Sipsey River. If you're going from Columbus to Tuscaloosa, you got to cross the Sipsey River. And it's not real deep, it's shallow and wide. this was part of a territory between the Tombigbee River and the Sipsey River that was uninhabited. Nobody lived there. You got the creeks on this side and the Choctaws on this side, and they might hunt that area, but they don't build any villages there. So there's no corn for DeSoto to steal. So what I believe Tuscaloosa and the chief did, they bring him up here to a village somewhere on this river where Mobilia is. And they have a large fortified town. And let me back up just 1 minute. One of the mistakes that everybody in these books has made is in determining the distance and the speed with which this army could travel. You have a written account, a day-by-day written account that was done by DeSoto's secretary, whose last name was Rangel. You have another account that was done by the auditor for the King of Spain. He wants somebody to keep up with all his stuff, so he's got his auditor there. He's writing down an account also. And then there's another guy from Portugal called the Gentleman of Elvis, and he's writing down. Well, DeSoto's secretary is traveling up at the very front of this army with DeSoto. What he's seeing is not what's going on with the foot soldiers back here. You've got a cavalry of about 250 on horses, DeSoto at the front of it. They can move at one speed, about 20 miles a day. Then you've got the foot soldiers. They're all in pretty good condition, and they can walk like young soldiers can do, and they could do 8 to 10 miles a day on a good day. Then you've got 400 pigs. Now, pigs can move pretty fast, but I don't know how you talk them pigs into staying in a line going down that trail. And when it comes time to cross the river, I don't know how you talk them into getting in the water and going across the river. But they had a huge herd of pigs. And then behind that, you had the Indian slaves, and sometimes there were several hundred of those. They're in chains, and they're carrying the heavy stuff. So they're moving at a much slower pace. Well, in Rangel's account, he said, we traveled 4 days and stopped at this village, and we traveled 5 days and stopped at this one for a few days. So when he left Coosa, going to Selma, there was like 28 days from the time they leave till they arrive. But if you go back and read the narrative, they were only traveling for 14 days. Okay, so you got to figure the slowest part of your army, that's going to be the slaves back here, maybe doing 6 miles a day, times 14 days, that only gets you 70-something miles down the road. That's a long way from Selma. So what are they all missing? What was I missing? Well, I thought, well, Rangel is up at the very front. He's moving at the fastest pace they can move, 20 miles a day. And when they're stopping at this village, why are they stopping there? There's a McDonald's. They were always hungry. Kentucky Fried Chicken. Food. Well, maybe that's it. They stop and they fill up on food. Or maybe they're waiting on the rest of the army to catch up with them. And I said, damn, that's it. Excuse my language. That's it. It's so simple. And it's what everybody is missing. The 14 days is what the cavalry is doing. So you go and multiply 14 days times 20 miles a day, you're at 280 miles. The rest of the army may be doing 8 miles a day, but they're traveling for 32 days. So the 8 times the 32 gets you about the same spot. And I said, they've ever won. I mean, y'all may think I'm silly by saying all these really, really smart people have got it wrong, but they've got it wrong. They've missed the figuring the distance. Now, the best and latest book, and one that's quoted all the time, Charles Hudson. And I read his book. He tried really, really, really hard to get it right. Him and his wife got in a car and drove the whole trail. You read his book, you think, he's right on. He's got it figured out. He knows what he's talking about. You read her book, you say, he wasn't really that sure about what he was saying, and he was trying to get some help or find something. Well, I didn't know. Did he get the distance and travel time right or wrong? So I found a paragraph, and he told me, he said, the Army can only travel as fast as the slowest part of the Army. And I said, he got it wrong. It's wrong, because the cavalry can travel very fast. So he missed out. He put Tallahassee, which was at Selma, at Childersburg, Alabama. Well, that throws, from that point forward, his route is pretty close to right, but all of the things that he talks about are wrong. Okay, so once Tuscaloosa gets De Soto at his village, he gives him 400 men to carry his baggage. Well, that was just 400 warriors that De Soto is carrying along with him. He don't know it, but he is. So they get to the village of Mobile. It's a large fortified village, and I believe it's sitting on the banks of the Sipsey River. There is full of Indians, and they're hiding in the houses. De Soto and the group, the fastest group, ones up front, they go inside the town. And the chief has got dancing girls and food, and they're just having a big old party. And Tuscaloosa gets up and leaves and goes and gets in one of the houses. And De Soto sends for him, and he won't come out. So they get a little disturbance going on there, and the Spanish grab the sword and whack one of the Indians in half, and now the fight's on. So the Indians all come out of the houses, and they drive De Soto out of this village. So he's out on the plain, and the rest of his army hadn't even got there yet. He was up at the very front of them. But the guys carrying the baggage, all of the supplies, all of the goods, the sacramental devices that they use in saying Mass, the Indians have got all of that, and they just carry it right up and set it down by the gate to the fort. So De Soto gets driven out, the Indians come out, and they get all his stuff, and they carry it inside the fort. And there's De Soto looking at this and say, man, I have screwed up big time. They've got all my stuff. They got my spare guns, my crossbows, my clothing, my pearls, what he was really hating to lose was all of those items that you use in saying Mass. Because to the Catholics, that was a big deal. You've got to have those to say Mass. And now the Indians have got them. Well, I was trying to figure out why De Soto, he spent all day killing Indians, thousands of Indians killed, about 22 Spanish killed. They're all wounded. Some of them had 3 and 4 arrow wounds. They'd been hit on the head with rocks. But why would De Soto do that? He did a lot of damage to his own army, and he killed a lot of Indians. Because if he don't have that stuff when he gets back to Spain, the priests are not going to be happy. There were 12 priests with him. The cardinals are not going to be happy. The Pope's not going to be happy. He's going to hell because he lost all that stuff. So he's got to get it back. So he spends all day fighting and killing and burning. And then finally he kills all the Indians. And he can't get in there until the ashes have cooled off. So he sets up camp there, and he's got all these wounded people, and only got one barber / doctor in the group, and they're tearing up clothing for bandages, and it's a real mess. So they get in, and I don't know what they did with all the dead Indians. Whether they just pulled them out and put them in a pile, I don't know. And nobody knows for sure. They estimated some 5,000 to 6,000. I don't believe that. But they had to make it sound good because they couldn't go back to Spain and tell them what a screw up they had done there at that battle. So when they can get in there and dig through the ashes looking for their stuff, it's not there. So what has happened to all the stuff? Well, see, those Indians were a lot smarter than the Spanish thought they were. They knew they were going to steal that stuff when they left Tuscaloosa's village. That was the plan. They had seen the priests sit around or stand around with all this sacramental stuff, talking to their God. They wanted that stuff. They wanted to be able to talk to their God. So they set up these plans. They provided the 400 Indians to carry the stuff, and they carried it right inside. And I know they had to be carrying it out the back door as they're bringing it in the front door. Because after they've killed all the Indians and dug through the ashes, the stuff is not there. So they have lost a huge amount of the metal, the iron that they had brought with them, which is so important. So they stay there at that battle site for 27 days, healing up. And De Soto is wanting to revenge, so he's going around the territory, killing and burning all the houses. So now it's getting to be winter, and I've burned all the houses. And we've eaten up all the food. We can't stay here. We got to move on, regardless of what kind of condition we're in. So, 14th of November, 1540, they head off, and the narratives say they went through a deserted territory. That's exactly what this is right here, a deserted territory. Then, after 4 days, they reach a fine river. That's the Tombigbee River, right here at Pickenville, Alabama. Now, all the archaeologists have got them sitting way down here in Alabama. They're really up here. And in 4 days, a lot of the guys are probably on crutches. They're hobbling around. They're wounded. They're not in any condition to be out traveling, but they're traveling anyway. And what do they need? They need food. Where are you going to find food? The river. So they turn and go to the Tombigbee River. Then they head north from there for 3 days, puts them in downtown Columbus, Mississippi. Wow. They find a village there at Columbus, and on the other side of the Tombigbee River, the Indians have carried all of their corn and beans and put them on the west side of the river, so the Spanish can't get them. Well, they're really hungry by now because they hadn't had chicken nugget in a while. Although they do have this herd of pigs, if they have to, they can kill pig. So the Spanish have got to figure out how they're going to steal all that food. Well, they go back off into the woods and they build a huge barge. And it's so big they have to put it on wheels to drag it down to the river. They put it in the river. 30 horsemen, soldiers, and 30 cavalry with horses and 30 or 40 foot soldiers get on the barge. They go across the river, capture the corn. They load it on the barge and they bring it back to the east side of the river, back to Columbus. Okay, they've got this big barge. They've had to melt down their stirrups, any kind of metal that they've got. They've melted it down to make spikes and nails. So they got this big barge, but they're sitting, they move one day and they're sitting on the banks of the Buttahatchee River. Right, if you know where the Air Force Base is at Columbus. It's right there at the north of the Air Force, north of the runway, right on the banks of the Buttahatchee. They take the barge and they pull it up the Tombigbee onto the Buttahatchee, and they use the same barge to cross that river. And it's really swampy there, so it was probably pretty wide at the time. Once they get to the north side of the Buttahatchee, they spend 8 days taking the barge apart to recover the spikes and nails. Because they don't have a Ace Hardware down the road that they can get some more. All the metal they've got is what they've got with them. And they're running out. And when you know they're running out, because a year later, when they're on the other side of the Mississippi River, they're complaining about what poor condition the horses are in. And they say the horses have not been shoed since the spring of '41 because of a lack of iron. So they're running out of iron. But they've crossed the Buttahatchee River, which is right here. They spend 5 days going up the east bank of the Tombigbee River, come to Cotton Gin Port, which is where the Indians have been crossing the river for thousands of years. They have to build another barge. They cross the river. De Soto travels 1 day and moves into an abandoned village called Chicasa after dark. But now this is in the middle of December. It's the 15th when they're building the barge, and it's 16th of December. So that's the shortest days in the year. It's probably gonna be raining. It's for sure gonna be cold. They don't have much in the way of clothing. They gotta get across the river. You gotta carry all those pigs across the river. What if they had any Indian slaves left, they gotta get them across too. But De Soto moves on and moves into a village called Chicasa. And the rest of the army arrives the next day or over a 2-day period because they're moving much slower. This village of Chicasa, one of the reasons that the archaeologists are wanting to find Movilia so badly is because they're lost. They know he's out there in central Alabama somewhere, but he didn't leave any signpost anywhere. But when you burn that fort of Movilia, you're gonna leave a lot of charcoal and daub, and you know what it looks like, and you do too. It never goes away, it's in big piles. So they think they can recognize that spot, and then they'll have a place they can drive a stake in the ground and say, we know where we are right here, and we can go backwards and forwards from here. But for 200 years, they've been looking for it, hadn't found it. So it's either under a Walmart parking lot or they're in the wrong place. I think they're in the wrong place. So they need to be up here close to the Sipsey River. This is another view of his route. Let me back up. Ah, there he is. Anybody recognize him? Raise your hand, Mr. Palmer. There he is. At Chicasa, we found this large Indian garbage pit. And that's Buddy sitting in the edge of the pit, and we're digging up all this pottery that the archaeologists said dated to the middle 1500s. Well, 1541 is when De Soto was there. So they're confirming this is the right time period. This is the right date. They also finally, and this was the year 2000 when I found this. Y'all may get tired of me skipping around, but in the year 2000, I purchased a book about De Soto's route, and the guy had never been to Mississippi. Fact is, the only person who has ever been to this part of Mississippi is Jeffrey Brain. Out of all the people and all these words here, the only person who has ever actually been here is Jeffrey Brain. And he did mention in his book the possibility of a site at Nettleton. But that's it. Other than that, he's the only one that's even got close. So anyway, this guy said that De Soto didn't cross the Tombigbee, he crossed the Tennessee and went into winter quarters with the Chickasaws up in Tennessee. And I thought, that is just ridiculous. So I said, well, maybe I should find it. Because of what I did with that map project earlier, I've got the maps of all the roads. I know where all the Chickasaw villages are. They don't know that, I do. So I said, what am I looking for? Well, I've got to find a village with the burned houses, with the charcoal and daub. They have to have crossed the Tombigbee at Cotton Gin Port. It's the middle of December. 10 miles is all they could possibly do in a day. So I go to Cotton Gin Port and I draw me a circle that represents 10 miles. I said, he's got to be in that circle. And he's got to be somewhere on this road. So I start looking, walking the ridges and looking. 2 months, I do that. And then one Sunday afternoon, I walk out of the woods, and there I am, looking at that field right there. And you can see for 5 miles out across there. It's such a nice high spot. And I'm thinking, why have I never seen this before? So I cross over the fence and I take my shovel and I go out there and I just start digging some spot holes. I find 13 burned houses the first afternoon I was there. It's like Christmas and beating Ole Miss 100 points in football all at the same time. It is just a happy dance. Woo! I found it. They're gonna love me. They're gonna be so happy. So I go home and I call Jeffrey Brain, who is at Harvard University, who has been to Tupelo, visited my house, looked at my stuff, mentions me in his book, and I gotta tell him what I've done and what I found. And he says, it doesn't matter what you find, nobody's gonna believe you anyway. And I thought, well, that sounds just like an archaeologist. And he certainly busted my ball. So I didn't know what to do from there.